So we want to talk about how to write successful district grant projects. And I've got this slide of this windy road because it is our goal as much as possible to straighten out this road for everyone. So let's talk about the first thing that needs to happen when we write a district grant is you have to identify a need, right? So you go out into the community and you find out what the need is. You might do a community assessment, however you identify what that need is. Maybe it's projects, scholarships that you've done for a long time. However you do that. Then the next thing you need to do is decide if your club is qualified to receive district designated funds or DDF. So to be qualified, the president-elect has to have completed the grant management seminar online. Now this is new. Because PETS, because of COVID, is not meeting in person, we're going to request that since the Rotary International Learning Center has a perfectly good grant management seminar, that be completed online. And I will be sending instructions to all president-elects on how to do that. It's pretty simple, and it's a comprehensive workshop. And we're asking another club Rotarian, hopefully the one who's writing the district grants, to take the district grants workshop or watch the videos. And if the person chooses to watch the videos, we just ask that they send us an email, say, I watched the videos and I'm ready to go. If you want to write a global grant, then another person will have to take the global grants, the grant management seminar on the Rotary International Learning Center. So the only requirement, the only thing that changes there is that we're asking that your club have somebody trained in writing district grants. We've had it has taken so much time to help people along who know nothing about the district grant process as they write their district grants, that it would really be helpful to have people in the club who have some sense of what the process is. Clubs have to be also current with all their reporting, both district and global. They have to have signed the financial management plan and the MOU, and they're on file with the stewardship chair. There is a change to the financial management plan. We're asking the president-elect to sign it. And we're also asking the treasurer, club treasurer, since they're involved in managing the grant funds, to sign that. And you have to have paid your dues. That's called good standing. And do you have board approval for your project? We've run into a couple of multi-club grants where we were caught by surprise when one of the club's board didn't approve. Does your project fit into the terms and conditions for the Rotary Foundation? And I just want to touch briefly on a couple of those things. The first one I want to touch on is conflict of interest. And I'm not going to read this to you. You can read this. I'm going to show you where you can find all these materials as well easily in DACDB. So if you even think there's a conflict of interest, it's better to clarify that, you know, so-and-so is involved in this grant, but they're not benefiting, their company's not benefiting from this project. If you have a club member whose organization might be involved in receiving benefit from this grant, then that person should not be on the grant writing team or a signatory on that grant writing team. And that should be declared that this person's business is being helped in this way, but they are not receiving personal gain from this project. And so we need to talk about Rotarian involvement. If you look at the district Rotary Foundation manual, you'll see that there's some examples of Rotarian involvement. And almost every district grant written can have some sort of Rotarian involvement. So district grants are designed to be accomplished in 12 months or less. And you're going to see in a minute that we've adjusted the timelines trying to make this simpler and easier for everyone to understand. In the past, we have said that this has to be completed within 12 months of the date your grant was funded. And since they're funded at different times, that has created enormous confusion. And you will see that we have set December 31st every year as the deadline for final grant reports, so that you don't have to worry about when was my grant funded as far as the timeline goes. So you set your timeline, your grant project is going to be completed between May and August or June or whatever dates you choose. The final report is going to be due by December 31st every year, making it simple for everyone. And in many cases, that does give you even extra time. So when you're calculating the costs of your project, the budget for your project, we want to make sure that everyone understands that if it's an international project, you have to account if there's an exchange rate issue involved in the grant. Gift cards, with COVID, a lot of people were using gift cards. It happened in many grants, and it became a little bit problematic. So here's the issue with gift cards. Gift cards cannot be used for a general thing like buying groceries or a gift card to Home Depot or Target. They can be used if that store only sells a specific item. So if you're trying to support a local restaurant and that restaurant just sells food and you're trying to help homeless teens, you can give them gift cards to that restaurant so that we know that they're getting $25 worth of food at that restaurant. And of course, there can't be any change with these gift cards. With one of the grants, people were given like a voucher to a vacuum cleaner store because their business was cleaning houses and they lost their vacuum cleaner in a fire. They could take that voucher to the vacuum cleaner store and get a vacuum cleaner. So it's really important that that those funds be able to be tracked in some way. And with each of those stores that we had that agreement with those vouchers, the store was providing the district or was providing our club with a receipt for those items purchased. Also, it's best practices to have Rotarians involved, like a Kids Spree, where they're going out and buying clothes. When we had the tool replacement grant, Rotarians met with the recipients at a local hardware store and shopped with them so that there was Rotarian involvement. And one Rotarian, past district governor Chuck Root, said it was one of the most meaningful activities that he's ever done, was shopping with people to replace things they'd lost in the fire. So anytime we can involve Rotarians with the end recipient, it's always a really positive experience for everyone. I want to mention cooperating organizations because that can become problematic. And I just basically copied this right out of the terms and conditions from the Rotary Foundation. I'll let you read that first paragraph. And specifically for district grants, all funding provided to cooperating organizations need to be used, have to have specific project expenses and maintain an itemized report of those expenses. And so to this end, we have created a cooperating organization, a real simple MOU for each cooperating organization involved in a district grant. And it just basically says, what is the organization going to do and what is the Rotary Club going to do, and track those expenses. So it's very simple thing to do. We just need to track those expenses. And this is only being done because it's been problematic in the past. I want to talk a little bit about pass-through because pass-through is not allowed in the terms and conditions. There's only one true pass-through that's allowed in the terms and conditions, and that is you can fund shelter box. You can write a district grant for $1,000 in DDF and $1,000 club match, and you just write a check to Shelter Box. That's the only pass-through that there is. Other examples where money kind of passes through are RILA, and Rotarian involvement could be selecting students. Any student scholarship, Rotarians can be involved in selecting students, interviewing students, staying connected with those students, overseeing what's happening with the students. We have a person in charge of scholarships, and throughout the year, she calls the students and emails the students to check and see how they're doing. On page 7 of the DRFC manual, it talks about student scholarships, and you can see that with international student scholarships, that we are requesting an MOU for each organization that handles DDF. So if you have a student in Africa attending school and you want to support them, but you send the money to a cooperating organization, that cooperating organization needs to sign the MOU and exactly what they're going to do with those funds. And then if the funds are then transferred to a school, we just need to see receipt that those funds are transferred to the school and that the school has an MOU saying that they're going to use the money for the student's education. If you're going to, you can use up to $500 to travel on a district grant if it's connected to the grant project. And if you're going to use anything that has to do with the Rotary Foundation, many times you have to go through the Rotary International Travel Service called RITS. So if you're going to travel, you might check with them to make sure that you don't have to use them if you have a personal travel agent or you arranging your own travel if it involves DDF. You can use district grants for community assessment, for a global grant or for a district grant. And so as long as Rotarians are involved on either end, if it's an international community assessment, you have Rotarians involved on the other end, or if it's a local one, you have Rotarians involved doing a local one. So one of the things we need to make sure that people understand is that Rotary scholarships, regardless if it's a global grant or a district grant, can't go to a child, grandchild, spouse, or other relation to a Rotarian. And in the, I mentioned Rotarian participation. In our manual, it says project development, engaging in the publicity or public image, presenting a program, financial or fiscal management, hands-on work, media development, or being a liaison. So there's any number of ways Rotarians can be involved. And this is the question that came up earlier from Paula about district bank account. It's really important that each club have a district grants bank account if you're writing district grants. You don't need one for each grant, you just need one for your district grants. Now, it's important not only that the district DDF go into that account, but that your club matching dollars go into that account. And then the dollars need to be spent from that account. The dollars you can't be commingling dollars back and forth between the club account and the district grants account. Once the funds are in the district grants bank account or sub account, all money supporting that grant or that project needs to be spent out of that account. So checks have to be written on that account or that sub account. Or if you have a debit card in your club, you have to have a debit card on that particular sub account. That's the Rotary Foundation requirement for isolating those funds. And if you have questions on that, we can talk more about that. So let's say that one of the changes that you're going to see is that you don't have to write a pre-application any longer. We're trying to simplify this whole thing. So when you write your application, it is the application, one and done. So, and that's going to be due June 1st again. So let's say you write that application and you submit it to the district for approval and you go, uh-oh, we want to do something different because back in May or April, when we were planning this project, this was going to happen, but it didn't happen. Can we change it? Absolutely, you can change it. You can change it anytime up till the time that you actually do it. If it's similar in nature and scope, you can submit the change to the District Grants Committee and to the DRFCC, which is me or the person in my place, and we will review it. If the scope of the grant is significantly different, then I have to send an email to the Rotary Foundation saying, will you approve this change to this project? And if it fits within the terms and conditions, they always do it. So it's not a big deal. It's just if you decide you're going to change it, then you have to move your grant back to draft status and then make those changes to it. So Lynn mentioned the budget. Once it's submitted to the district, you can change your grant budget. You can't make your match less than what the DDF is. But if you want to change the DDF, only the district grants chair can make that change for you unless you want to revert your grant back to a draft. Then you can make all the changes you want and then resubmit it. Remember, if you revert your grant back to a draft, that the signatures go away. And so it has to be re-signed. And so that's an issue, especially for multi-club grants. If you have 6 president-elects sign it and you need to revert it back to a draft, it becomes an issue. It might be easier to talk with Kathy about making that adjustment rather than having to get all those 6 signatures again. I just want to mention briefly community assessment because it's not a requirement for district grants, but it can make a huge difference if you do a community assessment. And some of you I know have done that. I want to give you an example. When the fires burned in the Phoenix Talent area down here, I called the local liaison in the Phoenix Talent School District to the Latino community because so many of the people that lost their homes and everything they had were in the Latino community. And I said, if we wrote a disaster response grant for $25,000, what would you do with it? And she said, you know what? We don't need food and we don't need clothes because there are so many people donating food and clothing into this area that we don't even have a place to store it all, which is an amazing thing, which is a good thing, good problem to have. She said, but what we do need is these people lost their livelihood. So many of them do manual work, either as mechanics or yard work or a variety of things, housework, that they lost their tools. And the biggest thing that we can do now is help them get back to work. And by taking that few minutes to have that discussion, that led to one of the most successful grants I've ever been involved in because we hit the need right on the head and really made a difference for the people in the community. And then the United Rotary Clubs of Southern Oregon picked that grant up and took off with it, and so far have spent almost $200,000 getting people back to work. So taking a few minutes to find out what the real needs are in your community makes a huge difference. So I'm going to turn this over, you're tired of me talking, to Kathy. So Kathy.
All right, thanks, and hello everybody. Gosh, it's great to see so many of you out there who've been working on grants. And anyway, I hope both Lynn's walkthrough of DAC-DB of both the application process and the final report process was helpful, as well as Tim's kind of review of some of the key points you need to be thinking about for your club to be qualified and some of the kind of sticking points. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to walk us through kind of reiterating or looking back to what Lynn walked you through, looking at DAC-DB. I'm going to walk us through this application process and timeline with some specifics related to our district. And then after I do this, Hal's going to spend some time going through the final report process. And we're hoping that maybe by going through this a couple of times from a couple different angles will get at some of the questions and some of the issues that may have come up for you. And if you have questions, by all means, enter them in the chat box, because we want to be sure and try to respond to what your questions are. Okay, so back to the application process. As Tim just mentioned, we've made a little bit of a change this year by eliminating the pre-application phase. So in the past few years, by June 1, you have submitted this preliminary application where all you needed to do was enter the brief description, enter a brief budget, a few of the details, and club signatures, your president or president-elect signature, were not required at this preliminary phase in the past. So as Tim said, we want to kind of streamline this. Rather than having this separate preliminary application and then this completion of the application subsequently, we're eliminating the preliminary application. So June 1 remains the deadline for your application, but this year we want you to go ahead and complete it. And that means not only entering your project description and clubs involved and Rotarians contacts and a brief budget, but we want you to go ahead and complete it and go all the way to collecting club signatures. So again, June 1 is going to be the deadline. That's for the 21-22 grant year. And the date remains the same, although I will say we extended the deadline this past year. We did a few things differently because of the pandemic. But June 1 is your deadline. So let's move on, Tim. Completing the application. So Lynn again walked us through this in DACDB, but there is in the details tab, there's a space where you indicate your priority for after you've entered the title of your grant project. You need to indicate the priority. Is this the high priority grant or is this a medium priority grant? If your club is only submitting one proposal for a district grant, then it can be high priority. It should be high priority. If your club is submitting two proposals, which we allow in our district, then only one can be high priority and your second grant must be listed as medium priority, okay? This year we were very fortunate. We had enough district designated funds that we were actually able to fund all high and medium priority grants for every club that submitted a proposal. That's a little bit unusual. Often our goal is for sure to fund at least one grant for every club that submits a proposal. Again, as I said, we had enough funding this year that we were able to submit 2 grants for those clubs that were able to submit 2 proposals. So, okay, so only one can be high priority if you're submitting 2 grants. The second one must be medium. Also, if you are working on a multi-club proposal, a multi-club grant, that grant has to be listed as high priority for every club. Okay, so there aren't that many multi-club grants, but we certainly have a handful of them this year, and some of them are quite significantly large projects. And of course, the advantage of a multi-club is that you can request up to $2,000 in matching funds for each club contribution of $2,000. So you can do a bigger project by partnering with other clubs. Keep in mind, a multi-club grant has to be listed as high priority for every participating club. In DACDB, there is, in that details page, there's a little box where you can choose, is this round 1 or round 2? Really, we don't particularly make use of that, so you don't have to really worry about that that little box under the project details tab. Okay, so June 1 is our deadline for the submission of your proposal. That includes club signature, which this year we're asking for the president-elect to be the signer on it rather than the president, because in fact, your proposal is going to be taking place in the grant year for of the president-elect. So our deadline for everything to be complete in your proposal is October 15th, right? So we've said by June 1st, you need to submit your proposal. Theoretically, we want everything to be complete by June 1. In reality, as for example, Hal Kibbe and I have been reviewing grants this year. When we go back through and we start reviewing them, we find that not everybody has actually submitted everything that was asked for or responded to all the text boxes. And so we're giving you until October 15th to have your proposal complete, 100% complete, which is really plenty of time between June 1 and October 15th. No reason not to be able to complete your full proposal with all the associated documents by October 15th, but that's the date. And I will just add here that two of the sticking points, Lynn went over it fairly quickly, but once you have entered and filled out the initial tabs, we are asking you, and Tim just went over this as well, to submit documentation of your club's dedicated district bank account. And I think Paula maybe asked a question about that a little bit ago. Really, we want a voided check from your dedicated district grants account, and that needs to be uploaded into the documents section. And a lot of you have had questions in the past. I will just say, a lot of you used blank counter checks to write or to show that that was your district grants bank account. You can't use a blank counter check with handwritten name of your club and grant account. It must be actually a printed check or a bank statement that lists your club name and lists district grants bank account on it. That's definitely been a sticking point or a question for a lot of clubs. So anyway, we need this documentation of your club's dedicated district grants bank account. And the other thing is in the documents section where your the MOU, if you have any partnering organization, your agreement with that partnering organization needs to be uploaded as well. Okay, so that's all under the header of completing your application. We'll be reviewing your proposals after you've submitted them for district review and getting back to you with any questions for completion. Tim also mentioned in our timeline process, you have the next full year to complete your grant. Okay, so if you submit your initial, your proposal by June 1, 2021, it's approved and funded by October 15th. You then have the following year to complete your project and submit your final report by December 31st of that following Rotary year. So many of you know that Hal Kibbe and I have been writing to you, asking you if you have not yet completed your final report for the 1920 grant year. Your deadline is coming up on December 31st of this year. So December 31st, again, reiterating what Tim said, is going to be the end date by which project must be complete and final report must be submitted. And again, district grants are by definition short-term. So you really shouldn't be planning a long-term project that's going to take 4 years to complete. These must be complete in a year and the grant final report submitted. Okay, area of focus. This is really critical for global grants, less critical, but if you would like to indicate your area of focus, you have an opportunity to do that in your proposal under the details tab. Project description, under that very first tab, I'm going back, if you can imagine in your mind's eye when you're initially drafting your proposal, that very first tab under project description, we want you to keep that description simple. As Michael Soden described, when our district Rotary Foundation chair, Tim, is going to submit our request to the Rotary Foundation for our district designated funds, we need a limited, very, very brief description. So that initial description should be very short. We don't want the backstory. We don't want all the details. You'll have an opportunity to give us the full story and all the details under the application tab, but it's really important that we have a very, very brief description. If it's a literacy project, getting books to all first and second graders in your community, that's enough in that brief description tab. Okay, DDF requested. In our district, the maximum DDF request is $2,000. And of course, any request that you make for DDF through this district grant process, your club must submit matching funds. So your club contribution would have to be $2,000 in order to request an additional $2,000 of district designated fund in order to support a $4,000 project. Okay, multi-club projects, again, as we mentioned, are possible. The maximum district designated fund match on a multi-club project is $10,000, meaning that you'd have to have at least 5 clubs, each submitting $2,000 and requesting a matching $2,000 to come up to the $10,000 DDF. But there is a drop down when you come to the clubs involved. That's one of the tabs on your application in DACDB. There will be a drop down menu, and if, for example, my club is the Eugene Metropolitan Rotary Club, let's say we're going to partner with Southtown on a district grant. Under the clubs, I would have an opportunity to choose Eugene Metropolitan and Southtown Rotary and any other club. You are basically choosing from a populated menu when you are listing the clubs that are involved. Okay. Then in addition to listing the clubs that are involved, perhaps it's only your own club, or if it's multi-club, you'll have more than one club listed. Then you have to list the contacts for your grant. And again, you'll have a drop-down menu for each participating club, and you will choose who you want to be listed as a contact for that grant. We would like to have every president, if you're working on this in June, it would be the president-elect for your club. And if you are the principal contact, obviously you want your name to come across. Again, when I list Eugene Metropolitan Rotary Club, then all the names of my club members will show up, and I choose which ones I want to have listed as club contacts. So again, pick your club contacts that you want to be aware of what's happening with that proposal. And of course, your president for the grant year should be included. Okay, the application tab, that is again where you'll have the opportunity to expand on the details of your project. Tell us all you would like about the background and the details. And that's where we also want to hear about Rotary involvement, which of course, as you've heard several times, is critical. We don't want these grants to be passed through funding to some other organization. We'd like to see how you intend to have your fellow Rotarians involved in your project. Then you need to complete the budget tab. And for this application phase, the budget can be very brief. As Lynn said, you show your revenue side, your club contribution, your request for district designated funds. Under the expense section, again, that can be brief in this initial phase where you can say purchasing books, $4,000. Hal will talk about how in the details of the final report, that's where you get very detailed about how you actually spent the money. So completing the budget tab. Finally, the documents section again, we've mentioned it several times now, but this is where you upload your voided check from your designated bank account for district grants. And if you have a cooperating organization, this is where you upload your MOU to show us that you have an agreement who will do what with your cooperating organization. And just a quick reminder that Tim has recently populated the landing page for 21-22 district grants. So I think it's really handy. Lots of folks this past year asked me for sample, what should a letter or a memorandum of understanding look like for a cooperating organization? We've now got a template up there for you. We also have all of the policy documents right there. We've also got the timeline and these deadlines listed. So that landing page for 21-22, this next round, has tons of really good information for you all in one easy to find location. Okay, very important. District grant funds can't be spent until your grant has been approved. So we don't want to see you uploading a check dated in May of 2021 for a grant that's not even going to be approved until later. I mean, for which you haven't even submitted your proposal until June 1, and then subsequently will gain approval. So it's really, really important not to spend any project funds until your grant has been approved by the district, because we simply can't go back when you submit that check that you wrote to buy books or something back in, in May, when your grant wasn't approved until later, those funds can't be used to pay for expenses that happened before the grant was even approved. So that's just kind of an important reminder. Again, final report. Yeah, final report. Well, that moves into Hal's. I do just want to add one last comment about the timeline and say that we did, in fact, make some changes this year to these timelines because of the pandemic. So we did allow some early expenditures that were unique only to projects related to the pandemic. But you now can see all these deadlines and timelines, and important just that you be sure to observe those. So thanks, and hopefully we can respond to any questions you have after we have a chance to look at final reports. I'm going to turn that over to Hal.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. The purpose of the final report is really threefold. First of all, to document the project from start to finish. And by sharing the final report with your members, you keep them engaged in your club's projects, which in turn helps with both membership development and contributions to the Rotary Foundation. And thirdly, from a stewardship point of view, it helps us track the dollars. The district has a financial management plan with the Rotary Foundation, and it requires us to track dollars throughout the grant process. When we receive the money from TRF, it goes directly into a checking account in the district that's used only for district grants. A check is then written to the clubs, and in DAC-DB, I know Kathy and a few others can see it. We enter the check number, the amount of the check, and the date the check was written to the club. And we have a record that can be kept for 5 years, that's why we use DAC-DB, and that's required by the Rotary Foundation And the final report then that you're writing helps us with that record, and it shows us how the dollars are actually being spent. You know, Lynn has gone through and showed you how to fill out the narrative for the report. So what I'm really going to emphasize today are documentation of the expenditures that we need. The final report for the 2021 grants, i.e. the ones that have just recently been approved, is going to be December 31st of 2021. We still have some outstanding grants from 1920 that are going to be, as Kathy said, due December 31st of this year. Okay, Kim. The grant expense report. Go ahead, Tim. The grant is DACDB is creating a version similar to what you see on your screen. This is one that we developed to help us this year. So what we would ask you to do is please number and list all of the receipts under the receipts column. Sequentially number the receipts 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then in the payment column, list the check number and the recipient, and upload the front and back of all the canceled checks to the documents section. I'm not aware of any clubs that have a debit card that is directly tied to a grants account, but in case that happens in the future, that's why the credit card is showing there. If a single payment, one check, is covering more than one receipt, that's okay. Just out in the comments section, just write down this, this payment is for receipts 1, 3, 4, and 8, or whatever the receipt numbers happen to be. Obviously, the totals at the bottom need to be equal. Some of you may ask why we're asking you to do this. Well, it takes an inordinate amount of time to go through tens of receipts for 60 plus grants and try to match them up with the payments. This may seem like extra work, but I don't think it really is, because if you keep up with it as you go, it keeps your record straight and you can find things pretty easily. Do not take photos of receipts or other checks or documents. Please scan them with a PDF scanner. I know when we've seen photos taken this year, the JPEG files are so small that sometimes we can't even read them. So after you upload your files, please even download a few to make sure they're readable. It's particularly frustrating when we see labels on receipts or whatever that we can't read. For example, one this year was 1691-15-14906.jpg. I thought at first that was a photo when I was looking for receipts, so I just skipped right over it. Wrong, it was a receipt. You know, if the reviewer is looking for receipts and the final report has a bunch of files like that, it takes forever to try to figure out what's going on. So please label the receipts. Please label them the same as you did in the expense report. And also, it'd be particularly helpful in the document section if you'd create a folder for just receipts and upload all of the receipts to that folder. We need canceled checks, front and back, or a PDF copy of a bank statement that lists the payee. Most of the bank statements that we saw this year did not have a payee, they just had a check number. If you're going to have trouble getting canceled checks, then I would suggest that you scan the front of the check before sending it off, save it, upload it to DACDB, and then you can provide a bank statement at the end showing that that check was actually cashed. In other words, the bank statement will show the check number. I know this has been said at least twice before, but all checks need to be paid out of the district grants account, not the club account. Be sure you put not only the DDF into that, put only your DDF into the district grants account, but also your club's matching dollars. The only dollars that should be in that account is the DDF and the match and the club match. Nothing more than that. Again, having a folder in the documents section for payments and uploading checks to the folder is most helpful. You have an image folder in DACDB. It's a great place to keep your projects, photos. And in fact, best practices from the Rotary Foundation says take lots of pictures. use the image photo. It's under the documents folder. Upload your pictures to that. But again, please label pictures meaningfully, like loading boxes for food bank or Christmas trees or dental clinic setup. A picture labeled 2347641 doesn't really help all that much. In summary, by using folders in the documents section of the grants and uploading appropriate files as you go along the way helps you keep all your records in one place for when you need them. And I think in the long run, it'll save you significant amounts of time when you prepare the final report. So receipts. What's a valid receipt? I don't think this first bullet probably needs too much explanation. Anything that you get from the computer or from the store that was generated as a receipt is acceptable. Zero balance invoices with a business heading loop. This probably doesn't need an explanation, but you'd be surprised at the number of invoices that I saw this year that said amount owed. That is not an adequate receipt. You need to show either a zero balance or the invoice needs to be stamped by the merchant that says paid. There also needs to be a canceled check that corresponds to the invoice. You may be asking why, if I have a receipt, do I need a canceled check? Well, we need to confirm that receipts are actually paid by the grant. There was one example this year for a $2,000 project where the club turned in $2,100 worth of receipts, but had canceled checks for only $1,250. I doubted that there was any problem with that, but that could be a place where somebody could just upload receipts and not actually spend the money for the intended purpose. The club finally figured out the bookkeeping error, so in the end, there was no problem. Foreign receipts. The foreign receipts should be in the foreign currency, and you then need to provide an exchange rate in US dollars. Rotary has an official exchange rate that you must use. You can see it on the RI website. And a hint here is if you're searching the RI website, search it for exchange-rates. If you search dollar exchange or money exchange or something like that, you end up with a bunch of nonsense. So to repeat myself, to search for the exchange rates on the RI website, search for exchange-rates, and it comes up month by month. All receipts must be dated after the grant has been approved. Terms and conditions of Rotary grants say that you cannot be reimbursed for dollars spent before the grant was approved by the Rotary Foundation. Yes, this year there was an exception for COVID-related grants only. But in non-COVID cases, we had a couple of clubs that turned invoices that were dated in May or June of 2019. Those were not allowable expenses. In 2021-22 that Kathy was just talking about, grants will not be approved before the overall grant is approved by TRF. So if you just don't spend your money next year until you've received the grant approval just don't spend your money next year until you receive grant approval from the district, and you should be fine. Cooperating organizations. Just as a reminder, cooperating organizations are held to the same terms and conditions for Rotary grants as your club, and they need to provide receipts to you. The Rotary Foundation has audited other districts for district grants, and we could be randomly selected. If so, and if they find significant problems, then the district can lose all of their district grant funds as well as DDF for global grants. So maintaining good records is important. It may seem like extra work, but if you keep up as you go, I'm sure that it's less work. You might even engage one of your members and assign them to something in the project that is their sole responsibility, like collecting receipts as you go, filling out an expense report, uploading the receipts to DAC, and so on. None of us like administrative work that's involved with grants. And I know it's not nearly as much enjoyment as actually doing the grant itself. Now, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Rotary happens not because of RI or your district, but rather because of each of you and your clubs. I know that you're all volunteers and spend an enormous amount of time helping others. None of us wants to create more work for your club, but I think that we do need to assure that all that donate to TRF can do so with confidence and that their money is being spent as intended. Thanks, Tim.
You bet, Hal. Questions, Lee?
Yes, the chat box has been busy, so thank you. So I'm going to try and summarize some of these here. So I'd like to start with, there were several questions about multi-club grants. So I would like to start with that first for Kathy and Hal, whichever one would like to answer that question. So the first part on multi-club grants is the primary club that's the lead on a multi-club grant. Are they the only club that needs to demonstrate Rotarian participation?
No, I can answer that one pretty clearly. If you read the the policy manual in multi-club grants, all Rotarians, or not all Rotarians, all clubs need to demonstrate some Rotarian involvement.
In that project?
Yes.
Okay. So still on multi-club grants, Lynn talked about it and Kathy mentioned it as well on the application that's due no later than June 1st. For a multi-club grant, that would be the high priority for the lead club. Does it, if any club that's involved in that multi-club grant is submitting a second grant, can they list that as a high priority as well?
No, all clubs on a multi-club have to consider that multi-club grant as the high priority. Another grant, even if you're not the lead club on the multi-club, your other grant proposal must be medium priority.
Okay, thank you. And I think you addressed the question within our district. It's not the number of clubs that is restricting how many can participate on a multi-club grant. It's the amount of DDF requested. So the maximum of 10, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you for that. So I think it's worth, particularly since we made some changes, just going back and reviewing the calendar schedule versus what's due. We've had several questions around that. So if you could do that, Kathy, and use the year as well. So if it's June 1st of 2021 for the 22-23 grant year, something like that, and what the deadlines are and for the application, when you will be completing your work and accepting the applications, and when money would be awarded, and then when the reports are due.
Okay, so in fact, Tim, as I mentioned, and as I think Lynn may have shown, the landing page and the application process is sitting there ready to go for 2021-22 grants. So actually, if you have an idea right now, you should be taking it to your board, be thinking about it. You could go in technically anytime and start an application for that next grant cycle, 21-22. The deadline by which you need to have your application in DAC-DB with your president-elect signature for 21-22 is June 1st, right? June 1st, 2021 is that initial deadline by which you've got to have your proposal in and your president-elect, because of course your president-elect takes over on July 1, and we're asking you to get your application in before the president-elect becomes president. Okay, then the next step, we'll be going through, reviewing all of those, tabulating the amounts requested. The next thing that has to happen is Tim, as our District Rotary Foundation committee chair, has to make a request to the Rotary Foundation for those district designated funds. So we don't automatically, so let's say there's 65 applications, the request comes up to a total of $150,000. Tim then submits a request to the Rotary Foundation for them to transfer those funds, our district block grant, and Tim can explain that a lot better than I can. Tim makes a request and has to get approval. So your grant, even though it's in the system by that June 1 deadline, after that, Tim has to submit his proposal to the Rotary Foundation. We have to get approval for all of your grants, and only then can we start actually approving grants. Okay, so that's what we mean by we can't approve anything until we know that we have the funds from the Rotary Foundation. Okay, so then Tim gets that approval. In the past, that's usually happened sometime in July. This year was wonky because of the pandemic. Our timelines were different, but usually that approval from TRF is going to come sometime in July of 2021. Hal and I, for example, are going through again every one of your applications. We need to make sure everything is complete. If we find something missing, we're going to be sending you a message and say, hey, I'll just pick on my own club. Paul, let's say Paul submitted a proposal for my club and I can't find the voided check from the bank account. So I'm going to write to Paul and say, Paul, you need to upload your voided check from your district grant account. So you have until October 15th. So between June 1 and October 15th of 2021, that's your timeline to fix anything, for us to tell you, hey, something's missing. You need to get it in. Everything has to be done, ready to roll by October 15th. Hal and I this year were reviewing proposals and approving them. We want to do that as we go along. And if everything is in there earlier, we will approve your grant and we will request your district designated matching funds as long as your club is qualified. And then after this process, October 15, 2021 is the absolute deadline for making sure your grant proposal is complete. We will have reviewed it, approved it. Then you have until December 31st of 2022 to submit your final report for that project. So you do your project between for 2021, you have really over a year to do the project and submit the final report due on December 31st, 2022. I hope that was clear.
So if I could just add a comment to that, if you're Johnny or Sally on the spot and you get your final report done and approved, then that qualifies you for the next Rotary year. So the faster you do the final report after you complete your project, the sooner you become qualified on the grant reporting aspect for your next grant. Also, the sooner you do your final report, the easier it is to find those receipts that you may have misplaced or get that final report done. So it's much easier to do that final report post haste after you've completed your project.
Tim, I'd like to add one thing. It saves the clubs a lot of time if they will simply upload their receipts and their canceled checks as they go along during the year into DACDB so that they don't have to go looking for them at the end.
Good point. Okay, Lee?
And moving on with questions. So this, I'll kind of group everything around signatures. So have reiterated a couple of times that on the application, the president-elect, the president who will be sitting during the project year, will be the signer to submit the application to the district. So questions follow then: multi-club grants, who needs to sign the application? Who needs to sign on the final report end, which signatures or signatures are required? And how are signatures handled if the option is exercised that you're going to change your project?
So on a multi-club proposal, the president-elect or the president of the project year for every club must sign on the proposal. Now I'm kind of losing track of the details of the question, but
Okay.
at this stage, we're only requiring the president's signature at the application stage, right? So we want to make sure that your board has approved this and your president has approved this project at the front end. Right now, we're not requiring the president's signature on the final report. Leanne, I'm not sure what, and Hal or Tim may have
No,
responded.
that covered two of the parts to that is if there an application is submitted, appropriate signatures are in place, and then for whatever reason that particular project needs to be modified, what happens to the signatures and what does the club need to do then?
So there's two things. There's
project.
two things. If the project, if the DDF needs to be changed, then if it's a multi-club project, my suggestion would be to ask Kathy to modify the DDF. Otherwise, you have to revert it to draft and you lose all your signatures and you have to start all over. The second thing is, if you change the project and I have to submit that project to the Rotary Foundation, then I will go in and make a note in your grant, but we need to have the presidents, again, sign off on that change. We can't have somebody just making a change and nobody knowing about it.
Great, thank.
Hal?
Let me add a little bit there. If the funding for the project changes for all of the clubs, then all of the club presidents that are on the multi-club grant need to sign, because that's changing what that club is committing to. But if it's not changing any budget and so forth, then I would say that only the lead club president has to sign. But we really do have to be careful of committing clubs to funding something that they themselves are not committed to.
So my suggestion would be that if you have a multi-club grant and you need to make a change, that you contact Kathy and talk through what the issues are, and so that we can help you with that and make sure you're not doing extra work.
Thank you. I want to go back to John's question from earlier on completing the application. What happens if the date for project completion, which is provided to you on the application, is not met?
Actually, we're not going to be as concerned. Let's say, you know, you're proposing that you're going to do a book project in the schools between September and December of 2021, and you realize, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to finish that by December 2021. We're going to need to go into February 2022. We're not so concerned about those dates that you've entered into your proposal. What we're really concerned about is that you complete it in the project year, that you submit, write your final report and upload your receipts according to the district timeline. So we'll be flexible if you can't finish it as quickly. That the problem is when you think you need to go beyond the project year. That's where we run into difficulties.
So the project completion date is a goal that you have. It's not necessarily a hard deadline. The hard deadline is, as Kathy said, is completing it and having your final report done by December 31st.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock, so I'm going to keep pressing us forward here. Kathy,
Absolutely.
I apologize if you said this, I didn't hear it, but one of the things that the committee had talked about is if a club and the DDF that they have requested is part of a much larger project, if it's part of an $80,000 project and they're pulling in $4,000 in club cash and DDF for that, how do you want that handled in the application?
So in the budget section of your district grant application, really all we want to see is the district grant part of your project. So you can describe the fact that you have an $80,000 in the application tab where you go into details about your project. It's great for you to tell us this is an $80,000 project. We've got funding from the Meyer Trust and so and these other organizations. But for the purpose of the district grant, for the purpose of the budget in your district grant, all we want to see is the actual piece of your project pie that is the district grant. So if it's, let's say it's only your own club doing this project, you're going to put in $2,000 of club cash and you're requesting a $2,000 match, we want to see your budget for $4,000 of that greater $80,000 project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Exactly.
So quite a few questions about receipts and the image copies that you needed, the checks, et cetera. And one of the things, I'll preface this, that one of the things I heard Tim say and Hal is it sounds like we're going to be involving the club treasurers more in this because we're requiring their signatures now and some involvement from them since they're writing the checks. The grant writers aren't writing the checks. And so how might the clubs bring them into that so that we get the proper documentation? And then concern over, now with everything being electronic, that the backs of the checks, canceled checks may not be available.
So the recommendation, and Hal can chip in after I've given my thoughts, the best practice is when you write a check is to take an image of the check before you send it. What I have on my phone is a little PDF app. And it's just like taking a picture, only it's a PDF and it scans it with a click. So having that PDF image of the check before you send it, and you just upload that to your DACDB file, that way you're assured that if you can't get a copy of that front and back of that check, that you can use your bank statement to match it.
Thank you, Tim. So Hal, talking about receipts, it still says on.
Tim's thing first, Leon.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I think that in most cases, I won't say all cases, but in most cases, as soon as the check has been cashed, within the following month, most banks, I think, will send you the front and back of the check if requested.
And I'll just add to that, Hal, I manage funds in 2 different banks and I actually can electronically pull that check up and I get to see the front and the back and I can, make an image of it or print it out and then scan it for you. So I encourage people to look at that function. Looking again on receipts, one of our attendees wants to know where they're going to find that spreadsheet for final reports that you were showing, and then also clarification over all receipts, not just those over a $75 value.
Do you want to start, Tim, with all receipts? We're requiring all receipts, not just those over $75, primarily because our grants are so small that we need to track all of the money. I know TRF says over $75, but district policy says all receipts. That spreadsheet is actually in DACDB. Without going into DACDB right now, I can't tell you exactly where the link is.
I can show you, Hal. I'm going to share my screen.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, Tim is doing that again, looking at the time. So there was a question about, for more clarification, club is required to have a separate bank account to handle the district grant designated funds coming in. Is it a requirement that the club cash also be deposited into that account?
Yes.
Yes.
All monies that go to that project should go through that account.
But only the DDF and the club match for the DDF. Like Kathy said, if you have an $80,000 project, we don't want to see anything more than the DDF and the club match in that account.
So when you go to the DACDB grants page and you have changed the org year to 2122, then you will see all files that you might need: memo of understanding, cooperating organization MOU, financial management plan, terms and conditions for, this is from the Rotary Foundation, the DRFC manual, and that expense report. Now, it's our understanding that this expense report is going to be included on the budget page in DACDB. It just hasn't been done yet. So you can get the template here, but it's also going to be in DACDB. And all these files, when you click on them, will download or open so that you can download them.
Tim,
Yeah.
I'd also like to add that just to the left of where your cursor is, the grant expense report is also right there. So if you're in the middle, if you're not on this landing page, if you're actually in your club grant, that grant expense report is sitting there on the left-hand menu bar.
And it's there this year too, I think.
So we are going to ask clubs to fill out that expense report for their 2021 grant final report submission.
Yeah, I filled out several of those for 1920 just so I could figure out which checks matched with which receipts.
Okay, 2 more questions, please.
Okay.
Kathy, would you go over the application is submitted with appropriate signature on June 1st, and between June 1st and October 15th, the subcommittee will be reviewing it for completeness. And from there, what kind of access do they have to that, and what changes could they make?
Actually, you can access your proposal in DAC-DB at any time. The ability to edit your district designated funds request, that edit option, once it is signed by your club president and submitted for district review, you will no longer be able to make edits to your DDF request. And there's a little section, there's a text box at the top. When you're in your grant, in the club grants view, it tells you once you've submitted for signatures, the grant is locked, but you can still upload documents. You can upload checks, you can upload receipts into the documents section, you can upload photos, and you can the tabs for interim report and final report are still active. So you'll be able to write your reports and upload documents. It's just the initial text of the proposal and the DDF request that you will not be able to edit.
Great, thank you. So Tim, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And would you summarize, please, that we'll have this video available, where some of the other reference materials that have come up and what kind of changes you and the team will be making to our district manual, where those can be found, those hot links that you have put in so people can reference this. There's been a lot of information shared today.
Sure. All that's on that landing page under Org Year 2122. It's all right there, all the links. The videos, I'll probably cut the video in half. I'll probably make one video of the DAC-DB presentation and a separate video of the district presentation, so the file's not huge. And I will upload those to YouTube, and I will put links on that page for those videos as well. And don't forget that there's also videos available on DAC-DB. And Lynn and Michael are incredibly responsive if you have any questions, as well as we will try to answer any questions for you. I have a quick poll that I'd like to have you do. It's just 3 questions. I'd like to know if this whole process works for you. So if you wouldn't mind taking the poll so that we get a sense of whether or not we've met your expectations.
Tim, I think you were going to launch that this time.
I did.
Okay.
We're good. So it appears, I'll end the poll and share the results. It appears that we met most people's expectations. There's a few people that said no. If this did not meet your expectations, or if there's something that we missed, please don't hesitate to drop us an email and let us know, or give us a call, and we will do our best. Our goal is always to help this process through. The work that you do in your communities is exceptional, and it's our job to help you make that happen. Kathy or Hal, do you have any closing thoughts before we let these people go?
Just thanks for all the work you're doing. We'll try to be responsive to your questions and get back to you as quickly as we can. Thanks for all your good work.
I'd reiterate what Kathy said, plus thanks so much for your patience for all of our questions to you guys.
And if anybody wants to join the district cadre, we would welcome you, and we can talk about more. So